You know exactly what's happening on everyone's Instagram. You've seen the vacation photos, the engagement announcements, the gym selfies, the oversharing captions, the passive-aggressive stories that are clearly about someone specific. You've watched it all. You've processed it all. You might have even felt things about it. Happiness for someone, a quiet pang of something for someone else, a mild curiosity about a person you haven't spoken to in 6 years. And yet, your own profile is a ghost town. Last post, 3 years ago maybe, or never. You scroll, you watch, you absorb, and then you close the app and go about your life, leaving absolutely no trace that you were ever there. People have a word for this. They call it lurking. And the way they say it, it sounds a little like an accusation, like there's something slightly suspicious about watching without participating, like you owe the internet your presence, your opinions, your face, like silence online is somehow a form of antisocial behavior. But here's what I want you to consider today. The psychology of people who consume social media without posting is not the psychology of people who are hiding or afraid or broken. It's actually one of the most psychologically rich and fascinating profiles you'll find anywhere on the internet. And understanding it might completely change the way you see yourself, or the quiet person in your life who knows everything that's going on, but never seems to say anything online. Let's start with the most obvious question. Why do people watch without posting? And the surface-level answer that most people jump to is shyness, introversion, social anxiety. And while those things can certainly play a role, they don't come close to telling the whole story. Because plenty of introverts post constantly, and plenty of highly extroverted, socially confident people choose to stay silent online. So something else is going on, something more interesting. The first thing worth understanding is what researchers call the audience effect, and specifically how differently people respond to being observed. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon where people perform differently when they know they're being watched. For most people, visibility is motivating. The likes, the comments, the small social rewards of being seen, these activate the brain's dopamine system in ways that feel genuinely good. Posting is, neurologically speaking, a kind of social gamble. You put something out and you wait to see what comes back. And for a lot of people, that anticipation is exciting. But for another kind of person, that same anticipation is exhausting. Or worse, anxiety-inducing. Not because they lack confidence in the deep sense, but because their nervous system responds to social evaluation very differently. Psychologists have identified a trait called evaluation apprehension, a heightened sensitivity to being judged that exists completely independently of self-esteem. You can feel genuinely good about yourself and still dread the process of being assessed by a crowd. And social media, stripped of its aesthetic appeal, is fundamentally an evaluation machine. Every post is a submission. Every caption is a performance. And some people's brains look at that and say, I will watch the show. I will not be in it. Now here's where it gets more nuanced, because there's another layer beneath the anxiety explanation that I think is even more interesting. A lot of people who never post aren't avoiding social media because they find it threatening. They're avoiding it because they find it insufficient. Because what they want from human connection is something that a post, a like, a story simply cannot deliver. Think about the difference between a theater audience and the actors on stage. The actors get the applause, the visible, measurable reward of being seen and appreciated. But the audience members, they get something else. They get the full experience. They watch everything. They see the nuance. They notice what the people in the spotlight don't notice about themselves. They leave with an understanding that the performers, caught up in the performance, sometimes miss entirely. A lot of non-posters are the audience in this metaphor, and they're not there because they couldn't get on stage. They're there because they find the view better from where they are. There's actually a concept in psychology called self-monitoring, the degree to which a person consciously regulates their self-presentation in social situations. High self-monitors are constantly aware of how they're coming across and adjust accordingly. They're often natural performers, socially fluid, comfortable in multiple contexts. Low self-monitors are less concerned with how they appear and more anchored in how they actually feel. And interestingly, research suggests that low self-monitors often have deeper, more consistent relationships because what you see is genuinely what you get. They're not interested in curating a version of themselves for public consumption. They're interested in being real. And real, in the context of social media, usually means private. Let me paint you another picture. Imagine two people at the same party. One of them is working the room, talking to everyone, laughing loudly, making sure they're seen. The other is sitting in the corner, watching, listening, occasionally having a deeply absorbing one-on-one conversation with someone who wandered over. At the end of the night, the first person has made an impression on 40 people. The second person has made a genuine connection with 2. Which one had the better evening? That depends entirely on what you value. And the people who never post on social media have, in many cases, already answered that question for themselves. But let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough: the information advantage. Because here's a truth that non-posters quietly know and almost never say out loud. When you never post, people forget you're watching. And when people forget you're watching, they show you exactly who they are. The person who carefully curated their online persona for 2 years, then one Tuesday night posted something that revealed everything. You saw it. The slow unraveling of someone's carefully constructed image over 18 months. You watch the whole thing. You have context. You have pattern recognition. You understand people's online selves in ways they don't understand themselves, because you're not distracted by managing your own. There's a term in sociology called the observer effect. In physics, it means that the act of observation changes what's being observed. In social situations, it works similarly. The moment you become visible in a space, people start performing for you, or at you, or around you. Your absence from the performance keeps you outside of that dynamic. And some people find that genuinely valuable. Not in a manipulative way, but in the way that anyone values being able to see clearly. Now I want to go somewhere a little deeper here, because I think the most profound reason people choose not to post is something that doesn't get named very often. It's about identity. Specifically about the discomfort of collapsing a complex, multi-dimensional self into a two-dimensional public image. Think about what a social media profile actually is. It's a reduction. It's the highlights, the aesthetic, the carefully selected moments that together tell a story about who you are, or who you want to be seen as. For some people, that reduction feels fine, acceptable, even fun. But for others, people who have a strong, nuanced, internally rich sense of who they are, the reduction feels wrong, falsifying, like being asked to describe a symphony in 3 words. Not because they're more complex than everyone else, necessarily, but because they feel their complexity acutely, and they'd rather not misrepresent it. There's research by psychologist Dan McAdams on what he calls narrative identity. The idea that we construct our sense of self as an ongoing story, not a snapshot. People with rich narrative identities, people who think of themselves as characters in a long, evolving story rather than a fixed set of traits, often struggle with the snapshot nature of social media. Because a post is a snapshot, and a snapshot by definition lies a little. It freezes a moment that was actually in motion. It implies a permanence that wasn't there. And for people who live very much in the flow of their own story, that freezing feels uncomfortable in a way that's hard to articulate, so they don't post. Not because they have nothing to say, often because they have too much, and none of the formats available feel adequate. And here's the thing about all of this that I find genuinely beautiful. The non-posters are, in many ways, the people who have most clearly defined what they actually want from social connection. They know that likes don't feel like love. They know that 100 people watching their story is not the same as one person really listening. They've opted out of the metrics, not because they've given up on connection, but because they've raised their standards for what connection means. Now, to be fair, this is also a profile that can tip into something lonelier, because watching without participating can, over time, create a kind of one-way intimacy that becomes its own trap. You feel close to people whose lives you followed for years, but they don't know you've been watching. That asymmetry, knowing without being known, can quietly deepen a sense of isolation if it's not balanced by real contact. And if you recognize yourself in that description, it's worth sitting with. The same instinct that protects you from shallow performance can sometimes keep you from the messiness of being genuinely seen. And being seen, even imperfectly, is kind of the whole point. But for most people who never post, and I say this with genuine conviction, having thought about this a lot, the choice is less pathology and more philosophy. It's a quiet, consistent answer to the question of what they value. It's a refusal to perform for an audience they didn't invite. It's the digital equivalent of being the person at the dinner table who says very little, but when they do speak, says something that makes everyone stop and think. You don't need to post to have a presence. You don't need to perform to have an identity. You don't need to be visible to be real. And maybe the deepest thing the non-posters understand, that the performers are still learning, is that the most important audience for your life is you. If this video felt like it was describing you, or someone you've been quietly trying to understand, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What keeps you off the posting side of social media? You've been watching this whole time. Now it's your turn to say something. And if you want more psychology that actually sees the people who usually go unseen, subscribe. We're here every week. See you in the next one.